You and I are scientists, Professor. We buy our privilege to experiment at the cost of total responsibility. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about Planet of Evil, written by Louise Marks and directed by David Maloney. It's a 4-part adventure, and I also want to give a shout out to Roger Murray Leach, who did the set work of this story. The jungle in this story for Zeta Minor is just absolutely gorgeous, and it reminds me a lot of the petrified jungle in Doctor Who and the Daleks, the movie version and the TV version as well, where it's just covered with like jungle stuff. And this story has just a great colour palette and all that, so yeah, great looking story. This story it's very underappreciated in my opinion. Some people either overlook this story or just don't consider it that great of a story. And if you are one of those people, then you've already won the argument, alright? You've already won. This story isn't considered highly among many Doctor Who fan bases. However, that being said, I personally, as a fan of this era, really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it, and it just emphasises what I really like about this era of Doctor Who. It's horrifying, gothic, sci-fi atmosphere that really embeds into this story. A lot of people say that this story got inspired by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and though it is true that the writers were inspired by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's not really like inspired by, if that makes any sense. An element of the story that mainly takes effect in part 3 and 4 is very Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. However, to say that it's a story altogether inspired by the classic novella work would be an injustice to this story. So what is this story about? The Doctor and Sarah, not travelling with Harry Sullivan anymore as he left during Terror of the Zygons, land on the planet Zeta Minor, where they discover that there was a scientific research that was on this planet Zeta Minor, and they are basically testing these certain minerals to try and save their planet. But one scientist has survived. They find corpses everywhere. And this scientist, he seems a bit off-handed. He remarks his death of his fellow companions very abruptly, and when a group of people come to save the scientist, only finding one alive, he doesn't seem too cautious by the fact that there are dead bodies around and that there are people that are dead. His only interest is getting this mineral off this planet. But the Doctor quickly states that is a terrible idea. Part 1 has probably one of the best cliffhangers, as we've seen throughout episode 1. People being attacked by an invisible entity, and as far as we know, there is no way of stopping it. People just seem to be collapsing by an invisible enemy and then disappearing, reappearing as shelved up corpses. However, the Doctor and Sarah escape the custody of this ship that's landed, as they think that they are responsible for the deaths. And Sarah and the Doctor are trying to run away. However, a creature in a really strange effect, which makes it come out as like a silhouette, but like the light on it, but it's like the actual, most of it is like see-through, but there's like bits of it, like the shadow or the light, that's like orange, with an orange outline. It looks really, really cool in my opinion. You can see a sort of more physical version on the cover, but there. So yeah, that is a great cliffhanger, part 1. And then part 2, we have more intrigue about this plot, about what the hell's going on. And the Doctor quickly seduces that this material is made out of antimatter. And he's trying to stop this scientist from taking any of the material, as if he leaves the planet, it will cause a big bang, a second big bang, which will destroy the entire universe. And these creatures seem to be attacking because of the antimatter. So the Doctor gets captured by these people again, along with Sarah, and at first they don't believe them, but the Doctor slowly is like, he doesn't really convince them, but it's more of, right, whether if he is responsible, he's got all the power, so let's just see what he does. And so earlier on in the story, the Doctor and Sarah find like a pool, like a pond, but nothing's in it, and when they throw like a rock or something, there's no bang or no noise, it just seems to be going for endless. And so the Doctor then goes up to this pool, and a massive creature comes out of it, and the Doctor starts screaming, "No! No!" And the cliffhanger for part 2 is him falling into it in a freeze frame. That is just a fantastic cliffhanger. But yeah, and part 3 then starts with the Doctor basically falling into the antimatter universe and communicating with the creatures from the other universe. And I really like this effect in which they put Tom Baker basically floating around in like on a black screen. Reminds me of a lot of Omega's fight scene with the 3rd Doctor in the 3 Doctors, which, funny enough, is a story that also deals with antimatter. So it's great that the antimatter, though these stories have little in common with each other apart from this fact is consistent throughout the 2 stories. And I also like how we don't actually get a scene in which the Doctor and the creature are communicating. The next time we see the Doctor, he's already out of the pool, and he starts collapsing. He's saying about how somebody's theory wasn't right. And so they're going, Sarah picks him up. Now it's important to note that the cliffhanger for part 2 is with the Doctor falling into the pit. And at this point in the story, the crew of the ship don't trust the Doctor or Sarah. However, when we start part 3, all of a sudden they are completely fine with them. And yeah, it is kind of a whiplash, as you don't really understand what's going on. The story just sort of abruptly goes, right, they're now the goodies. And so they start organising, taking the material away. Whilst this goes on, Sarah gets the Doctor back onto the ship. And so they take off with the ship. But the Doctor has a little piece of antimatter that he kept in a little box. So when the ship goes up, it actually starts floating in the air, and they have to like struggling until it stops in midair and slowly starts turning back. And the Doctor basically explains that he's got to jettison the material, and when they do, a creature on the ship attacks, and the Doctor expects that one of the crew members is being contaminated with antimatter, dubbing the creature the Antimatter Man, or the Anti-Man, I think he calls him. So the story gives the villain a nice little nickname. Now, the story, a lot of people complain, not complain, but a lot of people's criticism with this story is that it's pretty obvious from the start who the villain is. It is the scientist that was working there to begin with. However, I don't think the story really wanted it to be a twist that it is him who is the person who's turned into the creature. I think the story's more focused on making you feel sorry for this person, as his life work has depended on getting this antimatter to regenerate their sun, giving them an enormous amount of power. However, when things start going wrong, he starts covering it up and does all he can to try and get this antimatter to their home planet, even at the risk of his own life and him transforming into a werewolf-like creature, absorbing the life force of some of the crew members. Whilst this goes on, there's a debate between the two heads up of the ship. The captain starts thinking that the Doctor and Sarah are now again behind this, but his second in command doesn't believe so, and does still believe the Doctor and Sarah, which is still really strange how he was so determined in part 1 and 2, and then all of a sudden he's like their best friend. But who knows? So there's a lot of red shirts that die throughout this story. It's also important to note that this ship, this crew, was designed to feel a lot like a Star Trek crew. The first 2 episodes feel like Doctor Who versus Star Trek, but without any of the Star Trek characters. You do get a lot of red shirts, the characters who are just there just to die. You got a small group of the crew that we do get attached to, and even the design of the ship and the inside is designed to look a similar way to the Enterprise. So yeah, I don't think a lot of people they felt like this element could have been pushed a lot further. As it is, it just feels like a generic knockoff of Star Trek. I personally don't think so. I mean, I like the characters enough, and I think they do enough way to separate it from Star Trek. However, it is of people's criticisms, and I will admit that there is some justification there. We get some really great intense scenes in which the Doctor tells them to put the bulk down as he starts talking to the Professor, explaining that they have duties as scientists, that they have responsibility, which is the cost of them doing experiments and using their research and stuff. So slowly the Doctor starts convincing this guy that the antimatter should be left alone. However, before he even gets to the bit to take him out to the ship, he starts turning into the Antimatter Man, or the Anti-Man. I can't remember which phrase they use. And he starts going on a killing spree. And whilst this goes on, he starts duplicating as we get the same effect for the creatures on the planet, but with the Anti-Man, as he has multiple like silhouette transparent versions of him spread throughout the ship, and the intensity just builds and builds and builds as the Doctor is kind of forced to take the antimatter man, I'm just going to call him the antimatter man, onto the TARDIS, in which he breaks out of his bonds and starts attacking the Doctor. And so the Doctor then goes, takes him back to the planet and throws him into the antimatter pool, and takes him back onto the antimatter pool. And it's important to note, I think, here as well, that originally this Professor character was supposed to be, he was supposed to die in this scene. However, that didn't happen. Philip Hinchcliffe, though he loves his gothic and he loves his horror, thought this might have been a bit too downer ending, as in this point in the story, it's only, in terms of all the new characters that we get introduced, only 2 survive. The Professor and the second in command, who befriends the Doctor and Sarah. So he was actually brought to come back to life, and the Doctor then takes him back to the ship. And we get a very nice, sweet ending in which each of the characters bonds, and the Doctor suggests that he use the movement of planets as an alternative energy source. A alternative energy source that we later see in the 10th Doctor era. So that's some really cool canon for you. So that's Planet of Evil. Personally, I really enjoyed this story. It's atmospheric. It has some not brilliant but likeable characters that you do enjoy the story with. And I'm always eager into the debate on the scientist and whether he's going to jettison the antimatter or not. But a lot of people feel that this story is generic or bland, and this story, in my opinion, is underrated, but it is a story that is rated lowly for some people. So do keep that in mind. Maybe it's the fact that I know that it is an unpopular story that I'm seeing it through that eyes and I'm getting more enjoyment out of it. So I don't want to build up people's hopes thinking it is going to be absolutely amazing. So there's the Planet of Evil. So join me next time where the Doctor and Sarah land in the 1920s and they meet a malevolent Egyptian god. So join me next time for the Pyramid of Mars. See you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. See you later.